Well, good day and welcome to you. It is June the 22nd. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you happen to be. My name is Gary Willing, and I want to welcome you to Search for Signs and just point out, if you want to know more about this information, I hope you check out some of the websites that I provided links for in the description portion of every one of these videos. So you can find out as much as you need to know to see if there's any truth to this information for yourself or not. All right, now I want to thank some people who had commented in the last video. Is it Evan Bella Adam, Zen, Derek Pagat? Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Bold Bearings? And is it Dorhe Driftwood? I want to thank you personally for replying to Bold Bearings' comment because it saved me from having to do it. And I like what you said, so I'm going to leave it up there. So I think you said everything I would have said. Ike Simerson. Let's see, who else? Perry Weeks, My Kilfram 26, Jean Eli, Sharon 667, Flying Car Show, all the latest. That is so catchy. I love that one. Thank you for your comment or your question, and I'll get to your question in just a second. Ricardo, is it Pels? I always mispronounce your name when I try to read it. Wesley, I really do thank you for commenting. You always like to comment, and you always have wonderful comments to add. And then Mark Hill. Really appreciate everybody's comments. Now, let me get into some of them before it gets too long. Mark Hill's comment was, Sadhguru is Maitreya. Well, thank you, Mark, for your comment, but I'm going to have to say that's a no for me. No, Sadhguru is not Maitreya. Maitreya is still unrecognized as any kind of spiritual teacher at this point and is on mainstream TV and mainstream media talking about politics, talking about economics, but not so much spirituality in the sense of spirituality. I'm not saying Sadhguru is not doing good work. That's for each and every one of us to decide for ourselves, but that is a no. Now, I will say this, though, too, real quick. In the very near future, when people start to really recognize Maitreya on TV, and it might be you, I have to keep saying this because it's very important. Please do not comment about who you think Maitreya is or a link to a video that you think is Maitreya. It's very important that we don't do that. So I'm about to talk about why here in a second when I address a comment. But anyway, thank you very much for that. Alrighty. The first comment comes from My Kilfram 26? Am I pronouncing that right? First, I'd like to say I appreciate your diligence in your spiritual journey. Thank you. You're very kind for that. Next, I'd like to say that I half-heartedly subscribed to your channel because you were interviewed by somebody that I like. Now, is that you talking about the Leak Project interview that I did a few years back? Yeah, that was a good interview. I love spiritual teachers. I love all the ones that you have listed so far. Maitreya is the newest one to me. But, have to say, even though I only watch one or two videos of yours a year, I still find it odd that the word Maitreya will come through my brain for no reason out of the blue. That is interesting. I'll also add that you're not the first person to tell me that. Over the years when I've talked to people about Maitreya, I even had some people tell me that they hadn't thought about Maitreya in months or years or whatever after I had talked to them, and then they had a very vivid dream about Maitreya. So that happens too. Benjamin Creme, who was the first person to approach the public about Maitreya and talk about him for decades until he passed away a few years back, he always said that his job was really easy because he didn't have to convince anybody. It was just to tell you about it and let you do with it what you want to do with it. And so that was his approach, whether it was on TV, on radio, even speaking to large audiences, answering their questions and concerns and so forth. He never tried to convince anybody. And that was one thing I always respected about my friend Benjamin Creme. But I also started to emulate it myself. And even when I do these videos, I always try to reiterate that that's my intention, is not to try to convince you, but just to tell you about it. So it doesn't really matter if you listen to one or two videos a year or just listen to one video and never come back, and I'm not looking for followers and things like that because I have such exciting content, you know what I mean? But it's about just letting you know about it and let you do with it what you do with it. Now, the other thing, too, that Benjamin Creme said that kind of goes along the lines of what you said was if you just hear about Maitreya from someone, whether it's Benjamin Creme in a video or even if you see just a photograph of Maitreya, then it allows Maitreya to enter your life without infringing your free will. These masters will eventually teach all of us what the truth of what these mean, but these could be just words for us right now. We might not really understand what these mean, but they live and work within the laws of life. The main ones are cause and effect, so they live and work within that law. They don't violate that law at all. We violate it all the time, especially in the United States. It's just our culture. We infringe upon other people's free will all the time. These masters never infringe upon our free will. And they're harmless 100% of the time. So they work and live within those three laws, especially. And it seems odd or peculiar to those of us who violate those laws all the time, you know what I'm saying? Especially culturally, if it's a cultural thing like it is in the United States. And I've traveled to enough countries like Japan and the Philippines and even Canada to some degree. They don't violate those laws and infringe upon people's free will the way that they do in the United States. It seems to be like, kind of like just almost, like I said, it's a cultural thing here. And then when you go to another country, they don't do it. It seems kind of like, really? You wouldn't do that? You know what I mean? And so I know for myself, knowing this information, trying to not infringe upon people's free will, it's like I have to keep working against my own conditioning in that way. You know, but eventually it'll be easier for all of us, even those of us living in the United States, because we'll have examples of how to live within those laws. These masters will be teaching us verbally through answering questions, but also just in the way that they live. We'll be able to see it as an example, especially Maitreya. And so that's the reason why people get really heated, even with me. They don't know me, but yet they get really heated with me because they want to know where Maitreya is speaking, what name he's using, what's all that, which would be a violation of even their free will, even though they're asking me for it. They don't understand why Maitreya would even not be using his real name on TV, but he's doing it because he doesn't want to infringe upon anybody's free will. And so his approach to humanity is taking longer than most people are expecting it to, or have expected it to, because he has to work and live within those laws. But when you hear about Maitreya through a talk or an interview, or like I said, somebody just sees Benjamin Creme's video on YouTube, after that it allows Maitreya to enter your life. And people have seen Maitreya multiple times after just hearing about him one time. My mother's a classic example of that. I've talked to her about it, and since then she's had a couple experiences with Maitreya and one other master. So it just goes to show you how they work. Now, the other thing, too, that made me laugh about your comment was it reminded me of my favorite TV show in the 90s was Seinfeld. Did you ever watch that show? And one of their characters on there was a very neurotic character, but he was also very funny. His name was George Costanza. And he talked about how when he first meets a woman, they're irritated with him, and then there's something about his name that just kind of sticks in their brain, and then it's like a commercial jingle. Costanza. And so there was this really funny episode where this woman even came back to him. She goes, I don't know, there's something about, first you irritated me, and then there was something about you. Then it was like Costanza. So you could say the same thing about Maitreya. Maitreya. It's like a commercial jingle. After a while, it kind of sticks in your head, and it comes out from time to time. So, but thank you very much for your comment. I really do appreciate it. Now, the next comment comes from John Eli. There's no precedence for peace, and there are things that prevent it, such as economic, political, and religious interests. Something out of the ordinary would have to happen in the world for there to be a chance. Well, is there not a precedence for peace? We talk about it every video pretty much. The Marshall Plan is a precedence for peace. That's why I bring it up. It's proof of what Maitreya says. Without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. And it shouldn't be much of a stretch to really look at it. I even included the link to Wikipedia so you can actually go and research it for yourself. So you don't even have to type it in. But if you don't want to use the links, just go to Wikipedia and search for the Marshall Plan. There's a whole bunch about it. Now, they don't look at it in the same way that I talk about it on this channel, but you can get some information about it and you can kind of see if what I'm saying is true. So, for instance, the nations that participated in it, and I always forget the number, I think it was like 12 to 16 nations, I think it was 16 nations participated in the Marshall Plan. Most of them are Western European countries and the United States. The nations such as Germany, France, Portugal, the United States, England, Ireland, had been at war with one another. And since the implementation of the Marshall Plan, they stopped, fighting each other in that way. It wasn't perfect. And there were some times, even between Ireland and England, but they never really went to war with one another in that way. Do you see what I'm saying? Even though it was more of a religious thing, you talk about religious interest, right? And that's kind of chilled out a little bit. But for the most part, even with Germany trying to take over Europe in which the way that they did during World War I and World War II, since the implementation of the Marshall Plan, which only lasted for just a few years and then ended, they haven't tried to do it. You see what I'm saying? So you can go and you can look at it. So there is a precedence for it. But until humanity sees that its very survival depends upon peace, of course, we're not going to change. You're right. There's a lot of economic, political, the religious interest, according to Benjamin Creme's master, is still very much has a nefarious effect on it, but it's not nearly as powerful as the economic and political divisions that are keeping us from the search for peace in that way. Now, you said something out of the ordinary would have to happen in the world for there to be a chance. Are you talking about the economic collapse that Maitreya predicted in the late 80s? Well, that's been going on, and we're starting to see the effects of it again, right? Where over the last decade or so, the economy's been so red hot that we've kind of forgotten about his stark warning about living life through the commercialization and the way that we have and how dangerous it is, and eventually it will collapse again. We've kind of forgotten that. We've kind of gotten back to the way it was, right? Well, Benjamin Creme's master warned about that even in 2008 and said if the markets are not allowed to collapse on their own and they're built back up again by the forces of darkness, he said it's the forces of darkness that are propping it up, that eventually that crash will be even worse. But he said before that it will even go to a higher highs, which is what it did. But when the crash finally happens again, it will be even worse than it was in 2008 in terms of the unemployment, the pain and suffering that's going to cause people and so forth. But it will eventually bring humanity to its senses. And then humanity will start to go, we can't keep living like this. I mean, you look at life right now, right? In the United States, we pay 10 times more for medications than they do around the world. Nobody talks about it on TV pretty much, except for Bernie Sanders. Rents are getting out of control where people can't even afford to live in a little dingy little apartment. In most major cities, it's gotten that bad. Wages have stayed pretty much stuck, maybe gone up a little bit, but not keeping up with the cost of food going up, the cost of gasoline going up, and all this kind of thing. And politically, they blame the other side, but it's the capitalistic system that's bringing this about, that the political system's been put in place to support. And so you see what I'm saying? So it's kind of feeds on each other. But the extraordinary thing that will have to happen in the world for there to be a chance is Maitreya. And we don't understand who really Maitreya is and how someone of his spiritual stature, as humble as he is, as down to earth as he is, as loving as he is, and without any hidden agenda, when he speaks heart to heart to humanity, how that will wake up what's inside your heart and my heart and everybody else's heart, that longing for unity, that longing for peace, that longing for justice, that longing to end hunger, he says is already within the hearts of all of us. We just need to see our own heart in it. And it's because of who and what he is that it will wake people up, where an ordinary person, even a very advanced ordinary person such as a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi or somebody like that, couldn't do it the way that he does it. And so that is the extraordinary something that needs to happen. He will galvanize humanity in a way that we've never seen. Right now, humanity is about as galvanized as a cesspool, but eventually it will be the exact opposite of what it is. Most of the reason why we're stuck in the way that we are is because of the fear that most of us have. He will help to wake us up to the point where we won't be so concerned about our fear. And we'll speak out. And we'll march for peace more than we've been doing. We'll march for justice more than we've been doing. We'll march for the end of hunger. We'll march for a cleaner and saner environment more so than we've ever done. We won't be quite as complacent. But that's really who and what Maitreya is. That's the X factor that into all this. So I really do appreciate your comment in that way. But I do also understand your cynicism about it, to be honest, but anyway, or at least your skepticism, I guess. So maybe not so much cynicism. But anyway, let's see. Let's get to the question. This comes from the Flying Car Show, all the latest. Hi, Gary. During your studies, did you learn about Saint Germain too? Is he a master as well? Yes and yes. So is that simple enough? Yes, he's a master now. He's the Master Rakuzi. And, I don't talk about it very often, but, the different masters have different types of kind of qualities because they are masters of a certain type of what's called a ray. And I don't really talk about it that much because it's really not as important to know that right now. It's more important to really look at why peace is so important. But if you look at this background photo here that I have in most of my videos, everyone with the exception of Benjamin Creme is a master. Now there's only 1, 2, 3 actual photographs. The other ones are either AI representations, like in terms of Jesus. But like if you look at the top left, that is actually a colorized photograph of the Master DK, who worked through Alice Bailey. And then you have in the middle, on the top and the bottom, are 2 paintings that are supposed to be very accurate in terms of the way that they look, of the Master Kuthumi on top, and the very bottom is the Master Moria. And then the one of Jesus is actually an AI representation, a computer-generated image of the Shroud of Turin and how his face would look based off of the image of the Shroud of Turin. And then you got the picture of Maitreya as he appeared in Nairobi, which he might not look like that on TV now, which I'm sure he doesn't, but that's kind of how he looked then. Benjamin Creme. And then the other one is a photograph of Sai Baba, who was a master who's passed away, but eventually he'll come back one more time. And then I'm getting to a point about the Master Rakuzi and the master who was Saint Germain. At the very bottom right is Francis Bacon. That's a painting of Francis Bacon, the literary genius that lived around the time of Shakespeare, who, according to Alice Bailey, was a previous incarnation of the Master Rakuzi, who Saint Germain was a previous incarnation of the Master Rakuzi. So he had 3 very popular, well-known incarnations. The first being Roger Bacon, the second being Francis Bacon, and the third and final one being Comte Saint Germain. And I talked about him a little bit in a video, and it's in a playlist that I have about the masters. It's a really simple, I did it early on when I first started this channel. It wasn't really that in-depth, but one of the things that I said in that video was he was actually the first master I actually heard about, but I heard about him through a 70s TV show called In Search Of. And I remember watching it. I used to love to watch In Search Of because it kind of freaked me out, but yet it was kind of exciting to see all this paranormal stuff. They talked about Bigfoot. They talked about other things, UFOs and other things like that, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and all that kind of stuff. But they also had this one episode where they talked about Comte Saint Germain being this mysterious figure, lived and worked and partied really with the royals of Eastern Europe, but never drank alcohol, never ate meat, just ate a little bit of fruit. As other people were engorging themselves, he just ate a little bit of fruit. And that was one thing that fascinated me, that was very memorable about that episode. But then the other thing was, after a certain time, he just walked up into the Carpathian Hills, and that was it. They never ever saw him again. So there was this folklore, whether he actually died or is still living in that area and so forth. Well, the Master Rakuzi, who was, again, who he was, his abode was in the Carpathian Hills. Now, whether it's still there or not, or if he is one of those masters that moved into a modern city like Maitreya into London and Jesus into Rome and so forth, was he one of those? I don't know. But he'll be one of the first of the vanguard to be introduced by Maitreya once Maitreya is out, known for who he is after the Day of Declaration, for sure. According to Alice Bailey, he's a senior member of the hierarchy, just as the Master Kuthumi, the Master Moria, the Master Jesus are as well. And he will not be a teacher the way that people are expecting him to be a teacher. He's working mainly with the governments of United States and Western Europe. And the thing that she said, and this is what I want to leave you with about this, is the thing that she said that I also thought was quite extraordinary was she talked about the controversy that came up some years after Francis Bacon had died, that he was the one that actually wrote the Shakespearean works, that Shakespeare wasn't educated enough to do it, and people were mistaken about it. And there was this huge controversy that came up amongst the intellectuals of the time and literary people of the time that it was actually Francis Bacon. Well, it was Shakespeare who wrote his works, and he was a very advanced disciple at the time that he's a master now too, but he was a very advanced disciple at the time that he was Shakespeare. But she said, and this is the fascinating thing, that it was around the same time that the Master Ricusi started to take over the affairs of state of the United States and Western Europe that controversy kicked in. And she said it has to do with when these masters do their work on the higher mental planes, it does affect the collective consciousness of humanity. So if you look at Maitreya, for instance, since the late 70s when Maitreya entered London, there's been this huge interest in the end times. There's this huge interest in finding who and what the Antichrist is, whether it's Maitreya or somebody else. I'm convinced it's because of who and what Maitreya is entering our lives, even in secret, and the way that he has affected the collective consciousness of people. And those people who were very afraid of the end of the world coming, or the Antichrist coming, were more afraid of the Antichrist, more afraid of the end of the world. But it's the direct result of the energy of Maitreya coming back into the world in the way that he has. So that's why when I get a lot of comments and questions about Maitreya as the Antichrist and this, it doesn't bother me, because it's their way of responding to the teacher already being back. It's just because it's their fear that's causing them that. But eventually, even those people more and more will start to see Maitreya for who he really is. But right now, they're afraid of the Antichrist. So hopefully that answers your questions and addresses some of the comments. But really do appreciate it. Everybody that commented, even though I didn't get a chance to address everybody, I really do thank everybody, and I look forward to more comments and questions in the future. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.